Welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast, the show about sparking and discovering endless possibilities where we work, live, and play. A safe place where we can help you peel back the cover to what may be blocking you from being your most authentic and happiest self.
Today's guest is Aoife O'Brien from Dublin, Ireland. She founded Happier at Work to accelerate women's progress. She's passionate about creating a culture that supports women to thrive, and she helps organizations increase their bottom line while supporting female leaders to reach their full potential. Aoife has been featured by several national media platforms and public speaking events discussing imposter syndrome, fit, employee engagement, productivity, and even remote working. She also hosts an award-winning podcast called Happier at Work. Aoife is a continuous learner and shares her journey of getting to this place with a bold mission. She practices and lives what she teaches with pure genuineness. Please listen today to learn how to walk the talk, connect values with fit and belonging, and recognize needs and strengths that help empower others to create happier workplaces where people contribute in ways where we all can thrive. Enjoy the show. Aoife, welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast. It was so nice to see you on your podcast recently. And I have to tell you, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm looking to hear your perspective on life. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And it's so nice to have done this collaboration as well, to have had you on my podcast already. And for anyone who hasn't checked out that episode, they should head over to the Happier at Work podcast and check it out and hear Darren's side of things, Darren's thoughts.
Well, I got to tell you, you were amazing. I really enjoyed it too. So yeah, go check that out, everybody. We'll put a link to that. It's pretty cool. And I'm sure we're going to build on some of that today. Now, you know what? You have a mission. And I'd love to know a little bit more about that for the audience to hear that early on. And then we'll circle back to see, how did you get here?
Yeah,
what are you up
absolutely.
to these days and what is your mission?
Yeah. And I'll talk about that. Like for me, I feel like it took me a while to get here, to really uncover what that mission is. But my mission is to accelerate the advancement of women at work, to accelerate the progress that women are making at work, because we're not making that progress fast enough. We, I think, even took a bit of a backward step during the pandemic, dare I say, a lot of senior women leaving organizations. But yeah, it took me a while to kind of uncover what that is, and I'm happy to talk about the journey.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your mission here and the work you're doing at Happier at Work, and what a connection to make that better for everybody, in particular for women. So yeah, let's go back. Let's maybe go back in your journey to understand a little bit more of how you got to this place of focus.
Yeah, so for almost 20 years, I worked in market research in fast-moving consumer goods, or as it's called in the US, consumer packaged goods. And I describe that as stuff that you buy in the supermarket. So really interesting insights, consumer behavior, understanding about people. And I loved it because it tapped into stuff that I really care about and stuff that I'm passionate about, stuff that I actually enjoy, like solving problems and analyzing data and turning data into insights and stories. Not everyone loves data. I love a good spreadsheet. I love using data to solve problems. So it kind of hit a lot of those areas for me that I really actually quite enjoyed, that not everyone enjoys. And I got to a stage in my career where I was always so ambitious at work, and I was always really happy at work, and I enjoyed work for the most part. And I had a couple of different separate incidents, let's say, at work where it kind of caused me to question myself, question my decisions, question work. And is this worth it? And kind of lose all sense of confidence that I had. So in one particular case, I had been talking to the senior leadership team about this promotion, and they gave me various different options, and then gave that promotion to someone else, but didn't communicate with me whatsoever. So they promoted, and upon reflection, my male colleague to the position that had been promised to me. And I just feel, aside from the fact that it was quite a misogynistic, toxic culture anyway, things started to really go downhill. Then I made his life hell. He made my life hell. And eventually I left, and it really caused me to question myself. So what could I have done differently? What should I have done differently for my career? What could I have done differently to stay? How could I have managed the situation better? But equally, I thought, from an organization perspective, what should they have done? What could they have done differently? Especially since I left that role in less than 18 months. How could they have kept me? They would have lost money from me. They had sponsored my visa. There was all of these things going on. But fast forward, I left that role. I traveled all over the world, and I landed back in Dublin, in Ireland, where I'm from. And a similar experience, but not quite to the extent. It was just a place where I didn't quite fit in. I didn't feel like I could thrive there. I wasn't doing my best work. I wasn't, I'm someone who, when I do something, I want to really deliver to a high level. And I wasn't able to do that there. And for me, it was the environment. It just wasn't a good fit. And so because of those two experiences, let's say, I went on and I ended up leaving corporate, and I went on to do a coaching certification, a coaching diploma, and then a master's in organizational behavior. Nice. And while I was doing the master's, I asked my lecturer, listen, this is what's happened in my career to date. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about it, especially from an academic perspective, like what does this all mean? And she said, it sounds like a fit issue. So this thing to do with fit and fitting in at work, and what does it mean to fit in at work? And so I became obsessed with this idea. What does it mean to fit in? And how do we get this sense of belonging at work? And for every assignment I had, and for my dissertation, I looked at this concept. And what I found was the first thing that was kind of a surprise to me was values are so important. Like understanding your values and how your values relate to the organizational values for a sense of fit. So what is your lived experience of the behavior that you're witnessing on a day-to-day basis? And does that line up with the behavior that you would expect of people? People like you should behave in a certain way. So that was the first thing. And then the next thing was about our needs at work. And we all have these needs that need to be satisfied. So we have universal needs that everybody has, things like autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Autonomy being a sense of choice and control over what you do and how you do it. Relatedness, how you get along with people, and then competence, your feeling of capability to do the role. And then we have unique needs that are unique to us, and we need to uncover what those are. And had you asked me 6 years ago, what are your values or what are your needs? I'd be like, I have absolutely no idea whatsoever. But the third element then was about your ability to meet the demands of the role. So that's kind of more a role fit. And I've changed that language because that is the least important factor. But if you think about promotions, if you think about job advertisements, this role idea or the skills that you have are deemed the most important thing to look for when you're looking for to put someone into a role. So for me, I've changed the language from kind of more the skills to more strengths. So I think it's so important for us to recognize our strengths at work and to get to use our strengths most of the time. And the funny thing with strengths is that we often don't recognize our own strengths. We don't know what we're good at because it comes so easily and naturally to us. We think everyone must be really good at that thing that it is that they do. So yeah, like this is kind of what I uncovered from having done all of that research. And it's only really recently that I've thought, okay, so those experiences I had at work, is that specifically related to being a woman? And I'm not sure of that answer. Like certainly in that first instance, I felt it was. But now I'm like, okay, as a woman, I have experienced these challenges that women face all the time at work. How do I help not just the women, but the organizations that they work in as well? How do we create an environment How do we create a culture that is more conducive to helping women to progress in the workplace? So it's not about fixing women, and it's not about fixing the culture. It's about finding that good fit between the individuals to help them to thrive and the organization to create that culture in which they can really do their best work.
Everything about what you shared is perfect. I got to say, the most important thing that I got out of that was the fact that you kept self-reflecting and trying to figure out what could be done differently. You started with
Mm,
yourself, and then you were curious about the other folks that impacted you. How could they have done it better? I mean, it's a sense of learning. It's not a
yeah.
blame game. You're learning.
Mm,
You're trying to find what could have been better. So the next
yeah.
time that's going to be better, or to do what you're doing now, which is to teach and to help people think about it across,
Yeah.
different leadership teams across the world. So I think it's I think it's wonderful. You're using the introspection as a way to heal.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, you say it's not a blame game, but when you're in that situation,
Uh-huh.
it really was. Like for me, I was blaming the organization, I was blaming the leaders, I was blaming myself for having made such a, what I thought, catastrophic career decision at the time. So there was blame because you're there and you're in the emotions and it's raw and all of these things are going on. So it was really hard not to blame. And I think that particular situation that I mentioned that happened in Australia, like for me, I carried that with me for a long time. It impacted on my confidence greatly into the subsequent job that I had, into setting up my own business. I really took that with me for a long time.
A couple of things there. I feel when you think about as a leader or someone that we trust or we believe has some type of impact on us, what power they have that could impact our lives. Like you're a living example of it cascaded you into this place of doubt and
Yeah.
you're unsure, you're wondering about your worthiness to a level.
Yeah.
You kind of step back to the point where you're like, I'm leaving. And right, you left,
Yes.
it got toxic even more than it was. So like just the
Yeah.
power of as a leader, as a manager, having the right care for the human beings that we actually impact. I mean, we we as leaders have responsibilities to bring out the best in each other. And the fact that some folks aren't doing that or not maybe aware of it. So I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they're
Yeah.
unaware of the impacts that they're putting on you or others. What do you think about all that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I've had this conversation on my podcast as well, is we can't just blame leaders and say, well, they should have known better. Sometimes they don't know. So it is raising that awareness of the impact that you have as a leader and the responsibility that you have. For my particular situation, I think that the thing that bothered me most was the saying one thing and doing another. So, like the complete lack of transparency, the lack of authenticity, and lack of responsibility. Then, after the decision had been made, it wasn't communicated to me at all, and I found out in the most horrible way as well. So, I think take that responsibility as a leader with, what is that phrase? It's from Spider-Man, I think it is, isn't it? With great responsibility comes
Yeah,
great power, or with great power comes great responsibility. I think that's what
perfect.
it is. But yeah, I think bearing that in mind, that you do have a responsibility to the people that you look after. And Darren, I love that word that you used again, and you've used it on my podcast as well. Care. It's just caring about people and caring what it is that you're doing. Intentional. Love that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and genuinely too. I think like you come across as such a genuine, kind, amazing human being that is set to help the world and do different things, and how you're going about it. Like you could just tell, and I love that.
Thank you.
I love that about you and what you're doing. And the other thing, you said a lot of different things that I'd love to dig into a little bit.
Yeah.
You talk about fit, like what does fit look like? What is that? What's
Yeah.
belonging look like? And does that differ between people? Does that differ between male, female?
That's a good point. I haven't looked at that. And I do wonder if I still have access to the data that I had from my master's, which is, I think, about 5 years ago now. I'd love to access that and see if there's a differential between men and women when it
Mm,
comes to that sense of fit. For me, it is exactly like I said. So primarily it's about the values and understanding what the values are. Now, again, I have questions around this myself. Do we have standard values? Like, should there be some just generic values that are a given? Things like respect, treat people with respect.
Yeah.
Show up and be authentic, be yourself, transparency. Like, some of these things for me, I think are kind of a given, but is that because they're my values? I don't know. And am I then kind of projecting my values onto other people? When you're thinking about values, you can think about, as an individual, what are my values, first of all? Because, like I say, I didn't know that 6 years ago. I knew what values were in the context of, we had these company values, they were on the wall. They were meaningless because they weren't really connected to what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. Even though we had values recognition policies in place and we were doing monthly recognition of people for living the values, it felt very kind of disconnected. We also need to think not only how we as individuals connect to the organization values, but when the organization talks about their values, is that the lived experience of people? So is this an example I can share? One of the organizations that I worked in previously, the value of simple. And this was the most bureaucratic organization I've ever worked in. It was so complicated, and to get anything done was just a pain. It took me, I'd say, about 9 months to get up to speed with all of the kind of intricacies, all of the different departments, all of the different subgroups within the organization, because there have been a lot of acquisitions and things like that. And one of the values was simple. And for me, it was anything but simple. And so if you're saying we have this value of simple, but you're not demonstrating that in how business is done and in how the day-to-day experience of people who work there, then there is that disconnect, and people start to lose trust in what it is that you're saying about what the organization does as well. So that's the kind of, I suppose, the first piece is the values piece. I'll talk about the needs in a minute, but I'd love to hear, kind of building on what did you want to ask me about that?
No, I love where you went with it, as far as, the connection of values, and it's our personal, and how does that translate into wherever we are? Because I think it varies by culture, by company, by community, by wherever we are, right? But our values don't entirely change. We just connect to it differently.
They should stay the same. Yeah.
And and for me, my values have expanded, I suppose. Like, I think about my value as purpose. I think about my value as being purpose driven. So I often connect those to be, how am I going to be? How am I going to show up? And I have a friend, a strategic partner with Fathom, that he talks about our identity is really matching up the words that we speak with our actions to this higher power values. Like, you should have him on your podcast, because it's how we show up, right? Because if the absence of values and you're just talking and running around, it's chaos. It's the opposite of simple. When we're talking about values with our actions, with the words, we have clarity and alignment. It's simple. Back to your value word, simple. And I know it's pretty funny, though, the way you describe simple, and it was nothing but. I think that's hilarious. So I couldn't be more aligned with you about the importance of values.
Yeah, but the difficulty is that, some organizations have values, but they're not really the lived experience of the people who work there. Some have the values, and they are a reflection. And some companies don't define their values at all, but the values exist anyway. It's in the behavior. Your values are as good as what gets tolerated in the workplace, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So whether you have them defined or not, they do exist, and it's very evident to people from the behavior of everyone else and what gets tolerated. The other thing that can build on that, so like this, again, this was a huge revelation to me, this idea that if you can make sure that people's needs are being satisfied at work, they'll feel better connected to that organization. So let's talk about those needs. I mentioned the 3 universal needs. And the interesting thing with those is, and again, this came from the secondary research. I didn't dive into this in a great level of detail in my dissertation, but it came from the research that I was doing from other papers. And that is the fact that we all talk about autonomy. Let's just give people a whole load of autonomy. Let's give them autonomy. That's what they want. They want autonomy. It's so important to find the balance there. You can't give people autonomy if you don't give them the guidance. So it's about finding that balance between having too much or too little autonomy. So if you have too little autonomy, you're being told how to do what to do, as you're being micromanaged. But if you have too little autonomy, you're kind of left to your own devices to figure things out, to figure out what direction you need to go in. And it's a real struggle for people. So you have to give the adequate guidance and direction to people and then set them off to complete the work in the way that they can do best. The other thing with autonomy in particular is that you need a lot more autonomy as you progress through your career. So there's kind of times where it fluctuates. So when you are early career, you need a lot less autonomy. You need a lot more hand-holding, direction and guidance. But as you progress through your career, and it might change from time to time, you know, if you're reaching a new level, if you've just been promoted, you might need that little bit more guidance, that little bit more reassurance. But you typically need less guidance as you progress through your career and more autonomy. So that's the important factor, is finding that balance. And then we have unique needs as well. So a unique need might be serving a higher purpose. It might be stability. It might be flexibility or variety. It might be status even, you know, so there's all of these different needs. And if we can make sure that we satisfy people's needs, and how do you do that? Well, you talk to people. And you might say, well, Aoife, what are your needs? And Aoife will say, I have no idea what my needs are. But then you might say, Aoife, what are your big frustrations at work right now? Well, I'm overworked and I can't get everything done. And my boss is telling me how to do what it is. Okay, that's something that we can work with. And then, you know, you might not even verbalize it, but you can see Aoife is feeling a bit micromanaged. She needs more autonomy. How can we address that? So by understanding people's frustrations at work, it really helps us to make them feel a bit more connected. If we can solve that problem, hopefully we can solve it, you know, with some training or whatever it might be. So that's the other aspect. And for me, those are the two sort of primary things that drive it. And then the third element is strengths, understanding what your strengths are. Certainly when I worked in corporate, we did not talk about this on an ongoing basis. We didn't talk with each other about what our strengths are, about who's good at what, who would be two good people to work together because they have such complementary strengths, by which I mean the one I always think of is the big picture thinker and the detail person, the kind of the tactical, like, how do we get there? Is this too ambitious? So putting those two people together, like, that's a winning combination because their strengths complement each other.
How do we find our strengths? Like, what would you recommend for us to understand it? Earlier you said it's hard to see it for ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
you know, how did you find your strengths, and what are those? Like, how would you?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So for me, there's loads of different ways that you can find what your strengths are. I think thinking back to when you're in school, like, what did you excel in? Was there a particular area? Did you excel in English, in science, in maths? For me, I was always good at maths and science and logic and problem solving, that kind of thing. So that's one thing you can think of. You can ask other people, you know, what do you think I do better than maybe other people are less strong at? Like, what do you think comes easily and naturally to me that other people aren't as good at? Or you can ask people, what do you think of all of the things I do? What is the best thing that I do? So asking other people is another option. And I'll give kind of a slightly random example for that I love sharing is, if you've ever done an escape room, I love escape rooms because it's me in my element. I walk in and I can connect the dots between these things and I can solve problems and I can, you know, there's mysteries and I'm under pressure. So there's a time element to it as well.
Oh, you're on my team then. You're on my team, whatever.
But I went and I did one with my friend one time, and she said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "How did I do what?" And she said, "Well, you just walked in and you were like, this connects with that and that solves that." And I was like, can everyone not do that? Like, I don't understand. I thought everyone was able to do that. And she's like, no. So just recognizing those times where you can do something and someone just happens to point out that, actually, wow, you did that so well. And there's also so many resources online that you can take. So I know Gallup have one. I think that's a paid one. There's other things called like Strength Profile. So for me, the kinds of things that come up tend to be analytical. So I'm very analytical. In the Gallup one, I come up as competitive, and a love of learning is another strength of mine. Like, I love learning. I read books all the time. I take courses. Right. This year, I'm planning to do something a bit more formal. I don't know what that looks like yet, but like something that requires effort and writing of articles or writing of papers or something like that challenges me that little bit more.
You could write a book about podcasting. You know?
I could write a book about podcasting, which is apparently what I said to Darren in our last conversation, which I'm like, wow. No, I would love to write a book. And maybe that is part of the challenge, because that's the writing. And if I had some sort of a challenge around that as well, that would be amazing. But for me, it's the problem solving, it's the logic, it's the analytical side of things. Like, that's where I really, really excel.
That's cool. I love that. You know, for me, like writing stories, I have found it's not only therapeutic, it connects things we're seeing today to maybe throughout our life, and those dots that are right there, you know, it allows us to reflect on that, kind of how we are today, like if we're positive or we're happy or judgmental, or we wonder with skepticism, whatever it is. Like, you know, it's you know, something I would definitely encourage you, Aoife, or anyone for that matter. It doesn't mean you have to have a book. You know, I think having some of that journaling or writing, I think is so therapeutic, and I have good friends that have done that have really helped them actually get free of what might be holding them back. You know, allows them to you know, maybe forgive or have compassion. And, you know, I got to say, I've experienced that a little bit too, in some of the things I've seen. Now, you know, back to you and belonging, your needs, you know, your strengths, and how this fits in the workplace. Like, how does that happen? Like, how does it work today in your, you know, the companies you're working with, and how are people trying to figure that out or fix it or make it better?
I think it's a real challenge, because a lot of organizations don't like to admit that there's a problem to begin with. You know, like, for me, it's a difficult conversation trying to approach someone and talk about their workplace culture. You know, I find that some companies are not open to it, others are. The starting point for me is always an assessment. So let's have a look at what's working, what's not working, and what levers do we need to pull. So again, talking about values, it's understanding, do you have values that are clearly defined? Is that the reality of the people who are working there? Is that the reality of the day-to-day? And if it's not, then it's kind of starting there to see, okay, so the values are aspirational at the moment. They're not the lived experience. How do we get those values to be the lived experience, first of all? And to get that to be the lived experience, it's going back to what I said earlier about tolerating what's being tolerated at the moment. And how do we create an environment where, and it's kind of, it's not, what's the word I was looking for? It's not kind of a whistleblower type of situation, but it's a psychologically safe environment where people can call things out and say, we agreed that this kind of behavior is not tolerated, so can we change the behavior? Things like that. The needs piece, again, it's understanding and facilitating those conversations. And I think really it starts with leaders. So leaders need to be equipped to have those conversations. And like I say, you ask people what their needs are, they're not going to know, but they'll know what really frustrates them at work. And they'll be open. If they've seen change at work, they're going to be open about sharing, these are my frustrations at work and this is what I wish was different. And if you've created that environment and made changes in the past based on things that they've shared, then they're much more likely to be open in the future. And then there's the strengths piece. So it's understanding and talking about that, talking about each other's strengths. We never spoke about that when I was at work. What's Aoife really good at? What can we give her more to do? We can give her more spreadsheets because she loves spreadsheets. I hate spreadsheets. So I don't want to do that. How about she gives me some of the stuff that she doesn't want to do because it's not her area of genius, and I give her more of my spreadsheets, just having those conversations. And for me, that makes work a little bit more fun for everyone if you do it in a nice way, in an appropriate way, rather than feeling like Aoife's getting all the spreadsheets now and she's not having fun doing other stuff. So, she's just suddenly has all of this extra work and she's not able to offload some of the other work that she has to do as well. And I'm talking about myself in the third person.
Talking about you though for a second, I liked how you were talking about your learning and you see things that you thought everybody could see. I think I have felt that at times where it's not so obvious, and it's one of those things. And I think you're there now, and I think based on your growth over time, it feels like you believe what you bring is unique and special and dynamic, and maybe it wasn't there in the past. And I think for leaders to also see that in you, to believe in you, that you're capable of doing anything that excites you and you're passionate about it, because I sense that, and I feel like that's kind of gotten to this place where I think you're also defining as psychological safety. And I'd love for you to expand on that if I have that wrong or modify as you wish, but that's kind of what I'm hearing as you're talking through all this.
Yeah, there's a few things to pick up on there. Like for me, it took me a while to get here. I didn't always have this confidence. I didn't always have this belief in my own abilities or understand my unique capabilities, I think. Another thing I'd love to build on with that is what I'm realizing running a one-person business and all the difficulties that go with that. I am an introvert, but I love collaborating with other people. I absolutely love collaborating. And similar to what we touched on my podcast, this idea of bringing diverse thinking and bringing diverse minds together, that's, I think, an area where I really excel, by which I mean, like, I'm just talking to other people, we're sharing ideas, and both of us are just, wow, the possibilities are amazing. But that comes from working with other people as opposed to working on my own. And I think that's something I've learned over time as well, that it's really, really important. I think in a lot of organizations, we have a tendency to either work alone or want to work alone on whatever we're doing. What I mean is the part of the work that we're doing, we're probably working in a wider team. We might be working on a project with someone else. But actually, if you had that time to have a conversation and to share ideas and bounce ideas around, what you might find is that the thinking kind of explodes a little bit, which is a fantastic feeling. So that's something that I think I've learned over time, and I'm going to really implement in my business this year.
How did you get over the doubt?
Oh, that's a deep question, isn't it? I think for me, and I talk about this all the time, but I still have moments of doubt where I'm like, I did some scary things this morning, Darren. Like I sent out some emails that I'm like, oof, I'm not sure if that's going to land well, by which I mean, I'm reaching out to people cold and offering them an opportunity. I'm not asking them for something. I'm offering them an opportunity, but it was still something really scary for me to do. And I got on and I did it. And I think for me, and again, I talk about this all the time when I talk about imposter syndrome. First of all, it's acknowledging. You need to acknowledge that you have that, if you're not taking action, it's because of this thing that you're telling yourself, that you believe about yourself, and admitting that, so I'm not putting myself forward for this promotion because, and you're telling yourself a whole load of stories. So the stories could be something like, I don't have time, I'm going to have to work longer hours, but all of those stories could be made up. The real thing is that I don't believe in my own abilities to deliver in the role. And so you have to first identify that that's what's going on. And for me, it's become a practice of kind of separating myself, let's say, from and let's call it the imposter syndrome. And I give her the name Sandra. And sometimes being called out by other people, but sometimes recognizing it in myself. So as an example, I was going to, as a small business owner, apply for an award. And I was like, I don't know if there's any point in applying. I don't know if I'm going to win. And my friend recognized that and said, is that Aoife speaking from a place of empowerment, or is that Sandra speaking from a place of fear? So that's the kind of the first step. And then the third step, I'm going to skip on over the second step, is about building up your belief in yourself. That's kind of an ongoing process, and you can enlist other people to help you to build up your belief. You can do some exercises to build up the belief you have in yourself. But then the third and crucial part is action. So it's taking courageous action, and it's not planning and waiting and psyching yourself up and feeling confident before you act. It's taking action anyway, and finding that confidence to actually just put yourself out there. And like I said, that experience I had in Australia, it impacted me for a long, long time. And I think I didn't even realize myself how impacted I was. And it's only now, upon reflection, and I'm looking back and I'm looking forward into 2024, thinking, I think I've been operating with my eyes half closed for the last number of years, and it's time to really lift the lid and go all in 2024. So, taking action when you feel afraid, and that's, you're not going to get confident by sitting at home, by planning, by thinking. You get confident by taking small actions that you feel comfortable taking, or that not that you necessarily feel comfortable taking, but they're a bit of a stretch for you, that they feel a little bit scary. But when things work out, when those actions start to pay off, that's when your confidence starts to come back. You're like, oh, maybe I can do this. Maybe this is for me.
Yeah, you're stepping in with the action pieces. I love that. And it's first being aware, like a lot of things. We can't do anything if we're not identifying.
Exactly.
Or we're not aware of it. And the action part, I think it's empowering. To your point about empowerment, we can, instead of saying the words I can't, or, asking ourselves, is it what it is, versus saying is what it is. Like, really kind of thinking about the words that go in between identifying to actually changing and pausing a little bit, getting curious about what am I really saying to myself to give myself that boost of confidence, that belief part, what you were saying, to then say, well, what can I do in this situation? Like, if it is what it is, what can I do today to make it different? So it isn't, it is what it is.
But we need to watch our language. Like, what are you actually saying to yourself, and catch yourself saying those things. And like this, be aware, become aware of it. And because when you think these things about yourself, they become then your reality. They become the narrative that I'm not good enough to do that. I could never possibly do that. And it's coming at it with a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And this is something, I've become aware of again over the last probably 5 or 6 years. But for me, it goes beyond just a person having a fixed versus a growth mindset, because you might have a fixed mindset in a specific area and a growth mindset in another area of your life. So recognizing where you're saying, I'm not good at maths, I'll never be good at maths, or I'm not cut out to be a leader and I'll never be a leader. But maybe in playing tennis, you've kind of started playing tennis and then you've got better and you've got better and you've realized that it's a learning journey. But then there'll be other areas of your life where you're saying, I'm never going to be good at that, or I tried that and I failed, so I'm not going to try again. There's all of these things that we tell ourselves, the stories that we make up, that really hinder our progress as well. So I think, again, being aware of that.
Yeah. And when you say we fail, there's learning. The idea is there's learning and failure, instead of saying, see,
exactly,
I can't,
what will I do differently next time? And
I'm not worthy.
Don't use the term failure. It's about a setback. This is a setback. And it's a setback on the journey to success, because you have to have those learnings. If you just go through life and you're just like, and success, I always use that term kind of loosely because different people define it in different ways. But if you're going through life and you've never had a setback, it's kind of like, what's going to happen when you ever have a setback in the future? You're going to feel absolutely despondent. You're going to, you won't have built up the resilience over time from having had those setbacks previously. You won't have necessarily the learnings, because if everything has become easy, have you taken time to reflect on what has got you there to where you are? Or, when you have a setback, do you take time to really reflect on that and think, well, what might I do differently the next time? What could I do better? Is there a different way to go? Are there different resources I need? Is there someone I need to ask for help?
Yeah, I mean, just sitting here listening to, it's just, you're so genuine. It's just so incredible because you're authenticity is just pouring out. Like everything you're
Thank
talking
you.
about, you're not just reading from something you've read or someone told you at a conference. Like, no, you're living this. Like,
Yeah.
I love how you shared your story earlier around some of the challenges that you had to overcome. And again, not passing the blame, but learning from the blame that we might have had in our mind, or that what could they have done better? What could I have done differently? What
Yeah.
you could have done differently? So I think all that's fascinating. Just hearing how genuine you are, and you are possible. Like when we talk about the words we use, the language we use, like I love the word impossible. Kind
Yeah.
of to me sums it up. But if we actually add a space in there, yeah,
I'm
it says I'm
possible. Yeah.
possible.
Love it.
And
Yeah.
it's just that opens the door to
Mm.
just slowing down, getting conscious to what's here and saying, wait, is that what it has to be? Can we do differently? And let's do it. Like, and you're
Yeah.
practicing that and you're living it
Yeah.
and you're growing, to your point about the fixed mindset. Love Carol Dweck's book, love her thinking.
Yeah.
And
This is it. This is
yeah,
it. And I think something that I didn't mention at the start, which became apparent to me when I started researching this, when I started looking into all of these kinds of different things that were going on, is that there's a lot of people that are miserable at work. There's a lot of people that are not happy at work. And it's not just me, it's not just an experience that I had, but actually, and that makes my mission, I suppose, bigger than just myself. It's about having that impact and understanding. And as I mentioned at the start, the mission has sort of narrowed down into women because I'm a woman and they're the experiences that I had. And maybe it's an easier message to explain to people rather than the generic happiness at work. And people think it's a little bit fluffy and wow, it's a great name and it's a great brand. But what can it do for me if it's not scientific, when actually everything that I've talked to you about today is very scientific.
yeah,
But I suppose what I'm trying to say with that is, whether you're a female leader or whether you're just an employee, whether you're a leader, then we're having, like, there's so many people who are impacted by this. There's so many people who work is not fulfilling for them, that they don't have that sense of meaning. They don't have that sense of purpose to their work. They're going in, they're not really that engaged at work, and they're not getting involved. They're not innovating. They don't feel like they're contributing. And then they're collecting their paycheck at the end of the month or every 2 weeks, whatever it might be. And that's kind of it. That's sort of their life. They're going and they don't feel like they're contributing. And then they're just, yeah. And that's, and I suppose I'm here, much like yourself, Darren, I'm here to change that. I'm here to show there is another way. There is that way to feel really lit up by what you do, to feel really happy by what you do. And from an organizational perspective, then, and you talked about it on my podcast, the impact that engaging people has on the bottom line, because that's what companies are interested in most of the time, is the money. Like, how, yeah, that's great, people are happy, but what does that mean for me? Well, that means that you're going to make 25% more revenue, 25% more profit, whatever it might be, and show the relationship between creating those really positive environments where people can thrive. So it's good for society. People are happier. They're taking that back with them to their home lives as well. It's going to touch on every aspect of your life if you're happy at work. And then from the organization's perspective, not only are they doing good by the people that they work with, but they're making more money as well.
I mean, such responsibility again of businesses and leaders on how we could create not only more joy, yet societal differences while people go back home with family life, while they contribute in different ways. I think people that are more engaged in general feel like they have time and they want to do things that will help out the community. They'll volunteer, they might help out other people in selfless ways. That's, guess what, it feeds on itself, creates more
Yeah.
joy, and it creates more giving. And it's just, what a cycle. I want to be
Yeah.
part of. I'm part of it, but I want more.
Yes.
I want to keep going there. And there's we could talk for hours. I want to go back though a little bit about with the focus on women, since we're talking about this as part of your mission. And I feel like a lot of what you're sharing can apply to men too, just, from my perspective, because I've lived elements of doubt, and I might have had a perception I had it all right. I didn't have it all right. And we talked about that in your podcast, so folks will have to go there to listen more about that. Yet, how do we help women? How do you empower women? How do we help people more specifically, to help your mission come alive more broadly around the world?
I mean, there are so many things that we can do. And I suppose for me, so I did all of this research, and I kind of called it happiness at work, and it's happier at work. And these are the elements to happier at work. And separately, I was talking about imposter syndrome, and I could see how the two are related, but I couldn't necessarily put them together. And now it's like, what if everything I've done up to now in my career is leading me to this? And it's the broader mission of women, and it's applying all of that research. So that's kind of how I came up with marrying those two concepts, and the mission being specific to women. But how do we support women? So there's two different ways. It's supporting the women themselves, and it's creating the environment that they can thrive in. So it's having flexible working, it's providing mentoring opportunities. I'm doing some research at the moment into what's missing. Mentoring is a huge thing. There's a lot of women that are not being mentored. They're not getting proper leadership development that's specific to women. And I think there are unique challenges that women have that you need to kind of address those things. It's having role models, having those women that you can look up to and say, I aspire to be like that. I want to be like her. It's having, and I don't like the idea of quotas. Like, I just kind of put that out there. I think but it's important to have increased numbers of women on the panels from which, or the pools from which the appointments are made. So if you're making senior appointments, you have a panel or you have a pool of candidates that you're taking from, you need to increase the number of women on those. So they're just some of the things that organizations can do. I think recognizing things like unconscious bias, and we talked about that again on my podcast. So realizing, and the whole thing with unconscious bias is that it's unconscious. You don't realize that you're doing it. I took this test. I think it's called the Implicit Association Test, IAT. I'm sure if you look it up on Google, you'll find it. But you can take it across a range of different things where you could potentially have an unconscious bias. And I took it and I was interested. I was like, I want to see if I have an unconscious bias with gender. And I do. And my question was, and I raised this, we did this when I was in university, and I raised this with my lecturer, and I said, yeah, but, does it not depend on the order that you do it? And apparently not. So they factor in all of these different things that could contribute to the fact that you got this unconscious bias result. So I have this unconscious bias against women, and I think a lot of people do. Wow. It's because of the society that we're brought up in, the media that we consume, all of these different things. So I think recognizing that. So that kind of, that's some of the things that we can do as organizations to address those issues. But then it's supporting the women themselves. So how can women help themselves? Well, tell people what you want and speak up for yourself, advocate for yourself. One of the interesting conversations I had on my podcast was talking about how oftentimes women are very busy and they're identifying and solving problems ahead of time, and then they never get spoken about. So their bosses think that they're not that busy, that they haven't encountered many issues, while at the same time men are saying, well, I came up with this issue and I solved it, and this other issue and I solved it. And they're verbalizing every single thing that they're working on, so that the boss understands the struggles that they have, that the boss understands the amount of work that they're undertaking as well. But women don't necessarily like to do that. So I think as women, we need to learn how to advocate for ourselves and talk about what our strengths are. We need to support each other. I think there's a lot of competition between women as well. And a lot of organizations kind of perpetuate that with, there's only one open position, you need to compete for it, like that kind of macho approach to it's kind of winner takes all. Women as well, like educate yourself on understanding imposter syndrome, seek out opportunities to connect, seek out a sponsor, someone who's going to mention your name when you're not in the room. There are so many different things that we can do to I suppose, to help ourselves and to promote ourselves to be able to achieve what it is that we want to do.
I think there's a lot there that, folks could take and put into action, like back to identifying and kind of resonating what kind of feel is showing up for us in certain situations. Because there are some things that I heard, I'm like, wait a minute, I could do that too, and advocate for myself in situations. Yet I could also be a better sponsor, and that's things that I've heard, like we talked about with unconscious bias, being able to speak up for other people that are not present, and then making sure that it's not about our voices, it's about making sure their voices are heard.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have a variety of questions that are coming to mind, and on the fly, I'd love to ask you these questions and then have like quick
fire round. Okay.
Yeah, like a speed round. Like we're just going with it because I wasn't planning on doing a speed round. This is not something I would typically do.
I'm up for it.
Are you up for it? All right. Thanks for playing. I'll send you a prize later. One word. Define happier at work.
Belonging.
Nice. Who on your amazing podcast has been your favorite guest and why?
That's like asking me to pick a favorite child.
Out of 200, right? There's something like a 200.
There hasn't been 200 guests. There's been over 100 guests. Yeah, gotcha. And what if one of them is listening today, Darren? Then and I haven't selected them. Or of course, I have to say, Darren is my favorite guest on the podcast of all time.
Yeah, I love that. So, how about maybe a theme, like your favorite theme that showed up?
A favorite theme among listeners, it seems to be well-being at work. Yeah.
For women to advocate and to identify and work with a sponsor, what would be the best advice you could give someone to go ask to be a sponsor?
I think I was going to say, before you said to go and ask, I was going to say just ask. I think oftentimes we hold ourselves back from asking someone, and you can have multiple sponsors and multiple mentors. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. So it's more than one word answer, but I think know that you can do that. You don't have to wait to be asked, that you can go out and seek that for yourself.
I was looking for more than one word on that one. I didn't say that. Is there something you would suggest someone ask as part of what the expectation might be?
So for me, flattery, I think, works really well. So, I really admire how you have achieved so much in your career. I would love to have a conversation about you and how you've achieved that. People love talking about themselves. And I think if it's the right person, they're going to want to raise other people up. So they'd be happy to take that time. And maybe it depends on whether it's a sponsor or whether it's a mentor. So a sponsor, maybe you're just feeding them information kind of one way to let them know, this is what I'm working on, this is what I've achieved. If it's a mentor, there could be a reverse mentoring situation where you're giving them access to insights about what's going on the ground. What are people actually saying in the organization? What are the clients talking about? That kind of thing, as well as them supporting you kind of with career mentoring. So, and I don't like to assume that someone doesn't have the technology or the social media skills, but there could be some skills that the person doing the mentoring doesn't necessarily have, and therefore they can learn something from their mentee as well.
Now, as far as the sponsorships and mentorships we have, I guess I would suggest, if you're one of those folks, and if you're in those roles, I would suggest really diving into these conversations, relationships, to understand we can get something out of them too. It's not one way, right? As far as we can learn from who we're working with, like it's more of I'll call it an allyship in some ways. I don't know, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, the person might be closer to the ground in terms of hearing, well, what are staff talking about, and someone who is in a leadership, a senior leadership role, an executive role who's doing the sponsoring might be a bit far removed from that, or they might just be hearing the good news or the survey results or whatever it might be. But I think having access to what people are actually talking about and what clients are asking for, what clients are happy about, I think access to that kind of information is really crucial at those senior levels.
Now, you love data. Do you have like one data point related to happier at work that has kind of been the most interesting or intriguing or blew you away when you first read it?
I think it's, again, what I touched on earlier, and I can't remember the exact number, but it is in and around 25%. Like, there's so many stats that are related to happiness at work where it increases productivity, it increases turnover, it increases profitability. So I think productivity is something like 20%, but certainly revenue and profitability is somewhere up around 25%. So that really surprised me. Yeah.
So it pays itself back.
And actually, I can't remember who did this research, but someone did do research into the stock market and over time looked at companies that were focused on culture and happiness at work. And the difference in performance in the stock market was quite remarkable as well.
That's fascinating. If you have that, if you have a link, if you don't mind sharing that with me, I'll
try and dig that out. Yeah.
That'd be great. Now, we've had such a wonderful conversation. And like I said, I think we could chat for many, many hours. In fact, we probably have. Here's the thing. I'd love if there's something else showing up for you that you wanted to share based on what we've talked about. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. I mean, hopefully people get a sense of how my purpose has evolved and may continue to evolve. My mission here, how it wasn't that clear to me when I was working. And what I'm continuing to do is to understand what my strengths are and try and focus on those areas of strengths and working on my strengths. I know what my values are. I'm trying to live my values and work with people who have similar values to me, understanding where my needs are not being satisfied and how I can satisfy those needs for myself as well, because I'm not working in an organization now.
Yeah. And I love you're saying trying, and you're doing it. And I think it's a sense of being now. It's kind of the evolution of who you are.
That's a language thing, isn't it? I'm trying. And it's like, oh, I'm downplaying myself a little bit. I am doing this stuff. I'm not just trying, I am doing it.
I love it. You are doing it and you're making a huge impact. And I'm so honored that you've joined us today on the Live Your Possible podcast. And I'm honored to be on your podcast and call us friends. And hopefully we'll cross paths again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And definitely go and check out Darren's episode on the Happier at Work podcast.
Aoife is so authentic. Her purposeful language connects the dots that guide us in simple ways to follow her footsteps. She's constantly learning and growing from her life's good and bad interactions. Aoife vulnerably shares her stories to help us realize we can overcome the challenges and the words that hold us back. Follow her wisdom to address the one word that represents happiness at work to her, which is belonging, addressing how people fit and connect to values by supporting their individual needs and recognizing ways to reinforce their strengths. Check out her podcast, Happier at Work, and consider her for your next speaking event where there's a focus on empowering women and how to best address imposter syndrome and belonging in the workplace. When people feel part of something bigger, they do contribute differently and thoroughly. They show up more entirely as their authentic selves. And when we do, possibilities pop into reality, enabling humans to amaze us by living their possible. Thanks for listening. Now go and make it a great day.
That's all for today's episode. If you liked the show, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Live Your Possible dares to unlock your fullest potential and become an avenue for others to do the same. Join the community by visiting ignitehappy.com. It's time to discover endless possibilities with equal opportunity for all. See you again next week for more insights on how you can live your possible.